Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be going over my tips on how to get a loud mix and master using FL Studio. This can of course be applied to any DAW, but in this video obviously that's what I'm using. This is a really easy and free method that I picked up over some streams on YouTube and Twitch, and I think it'll really help you out. It is a little bit unconventional though, a lot of people will tell you to do otherwise, and they're not even wrong. Mixing and mastering is something you can do really any way you want. This is just a way that I've found a lot of success with while I'm making music. So to start things off, I'm going to play a project here. I do actually have 3 different songs I'm going to play in this video while I showcase this method. One being a really aggressive kind of mixdown, that being this one being minimal and clean, and another one that's just like a really punchy kind of dance floor track I've made, all using this exact same mixing method, and I do think I've got them quite loud, and they sound pretty good. So here's the first one I've got right now. So this track I think does quite a bit right in terms of how I'm mixing it. I think my drums are super punchy, and that of course comes a lot down to sample selection, but also leveling and how I've placed them in the mix, and I'm going to go ahead and get into right now exactly how I've done that intentionally. So before we even take a look at the drums, I want to take a look at the main musical element, that being this sound right here. I do also have some automations that I'm going to have to turn on to kind of get how it sounds. But you see, the main sound of this sounds like this. Now, this is a bit unique because the bass and the lead are sort of the same thing the way the sound is made. I know that sounds a bit complicated, but that's not really too important. Just pretend like this was a bass and a lead line being played together, because that's kind of like the meat of the track. I have mixed this in a way where it's leveled out, hitting right about 0 on the master. You can see that here if I play it again. See, if I take off my master kind of clipping I'm doing here, it's going slightly over, but barely. That's not even really like intentional, that's just kind of how it is. But the method that I use for mixing here is actually, you want to try to get your main part of the song. So say you had like a more complex project than this that had like a lead, a bass, some pads for atmosphere, stuff like that. You want to play those all together and see if it sounds good if you sit it right around 0. A good way to do that is like pull up a limiter and make sure it's just below it, not exactly touching it so it's not actually being affected. Obviously I've done something different in this specific track because I thought it kind of wanted it, but try to get it as loud as you can, sitting right under 0 without actually doing anything to it. Again, this is going to work on a track-by-track basis. I've found this works quite a bit for me, especially if you've leveled your bass properly. But I like to do that and then mix in my drums, kind of doing the same thing, and you want to have a clipper on your master to make sure nothing actually goes over. I am using Clip Shifter, you can see that here. This is a free plugin. I believe they have a paid version, but I don't even have that, I just have the free one. I don't even change any settings, I literally just boot it up, and this is actually on my master template. This is usually all I'll have. So you see, if I play this once again, it's just clipping that ever so slightly. Like I said, ideally you want it to not actually touch it at all, but this track, it kind of liked it, so I kept it. And then we're going to get into how exactly I mix the kick and snare, some tops, things like that. So my kick drum in this project sounds like this. Now this sample specifically, a lot of times kicks are like this, sometimes they won't be and you have to adjust. This is just normalized, as loud as it could be, and I've literally left it like that. I have my kick, and kind of like the central elements of the track, all hitting right at around 0. Same thing with the snare. And then I do have some top layers that go in there as well. Now, kick and snare I like to keep at 0, especially for a punchy drum and bass track like this. I think that sounds really good, especially once you get to side chaining, which is super important if you're going to be mixing kind of hot like I am here. But then you just sort of mix to taste apart from those. And I've found that, genuinely, this has improved my mixdown so much. Originally, when I was getting into music production, I was doing like a headroom method where I'd mix everything down super quiet, and then try to fix that sort of in mastering. And I thought, honestly, and that's a completely valid method, tons of professionals use, you can get away with that. But for me personally, it really didn't work out. I found that when I was cranking the gain on like a limiter or something for a master, my track would end up super distorted and the levels just weren't where they should be. So I decided, why not look at this in terms of like creating a track how it would sound mastered, rather than mixing things quiet and trying to get it to that standard later. And this method has been extremely successful for me. But when you try this out, if you don't do something like precise sidechain, you're probably going to find that it's going to sound super distorted, and I can probably demonstrate that here. If I go to my sidechain channel, which is here, I'm sidechaining the kick and the snare. If I turn that off, you could see it right here on my oscilloscope, and you could hear it. When the kick plays on top of every other element, there's really nasty distortion. It doesn't sound good. When you're mixing super hot like this, that's going to happen, so you need to get a precise sidechain going. I have a very detailed video on sidechain on my channel, which you can go check out, but a quick rundown in case you haven't seen that. I'm using Pro MB. You don't need to use this though if you don't own it. You could use Fruity Limiter for free, or really anything you sidechain with. And I just make sure I solo the lows and sidechain it separately to the mids and highs. And I just kind of do this by ear, but I'm also looking at my oscilloscope. If you do it too short, you'll see you get like some distortion that's not good. Especially there, you can see it in the kick. And if you do it too high, it comes in very slow. And that could be something you want stylistically. But for me, I wanted this one kind of tight. Right about there is pretty good, sounds great. And then, you know, what you're doing to your bass, you don't necessarily have to do to your mids and highs. You could probably get it even shorter. And then you just put them back in. And I'm also doing that to the snare, because it makes it punch even more. It's already sitting at 0, but if you subtly duck everything else, it brings out your drums even more, and it gives you a very forward mixdown. That sounds really good. So this is super helpful if you're doing like a aggressive track. Like I said, that's what I have here. But I do this on every track, whether it's something like this, or if it's a minimal, like house track, for example, or something like dance floor drum and bass, and I'm going to show that now. I'm going to open another completely different sounding project I've made in the last week. So here's a house track I've made. I think this is super minimal, but I've done the exact same thing. I kind of got my central elements, made sure they were sitting at around 0. I'll play them separate first even. This one's a little bit quieter, you'll see. One of the kind of rules I do is I try to have my bass sitting at around, usually anyway, on like a master, -6. That should be, sorry, this one. That usually sounds pretty good to me, but again, that's going to depend on a track-by-track basis. And then I have a lead that's sitting a little bit below 0 because I thought it sounded even better in the background. But I did kind of the same thing. I just made sure my bass was where I like it to be, and then mixed my drums to around 0, at least for the original like kick and sometimes the clap sample. So I'll play what that sounds like now so you can hear how it goes. So you see, this one is honestly a bit of a quieter track. It's still a fairly loud mixdown, especially if we pull up a loudness meter. But like, this one wanted to be more minimal. I made sure not to push it too hard, because even though, you know, you decide like, oh, I want loudness in my mixdowns, and that's completely fair. You want your tracks to be competitive. That should not be your priority. The priority, and I need to stress, always needs to be making it sound good. But you see, something minimal like this, we're still at a pretty healthy number here. Like, this is good. It's not particularly loud by any means, but that's because of the track, not because of the way we've mixed it. And the way I do this as well, you'll notice, like, on my master, especially on this one, ignore the loudness meter I just put up, my mastering is literally just a clip shifter. Now, if it's something that I want to go and release, for example, I will actually replace this with a ozone that I own. And that's just because I think you can kind of get away with a little bit more limiting. It's kind of more transparent. But clip shifter's free and completely capable. You don't even need to do that, really. But I'm actually going to showcase that now. I'm going to open up something that I've released and show you how I applied this there, because I think that, of the 3 tracks, is going to be the best example, because this one and the one I showed previously were just little sketches I put together in maybe like an hour or two, and that one is going to be something that has a lot more hours in it, and something that you could apply even better if you have something similar, like a full track that you're ready to put out. So I'm going to go ahead and open that now. So this track right here that I've just opened, you'll notice it is a stem mixdown, because this was literally the final stage of the track, but this is my most recent release, Eve. And as I say, this is one that's a lot more final, so you can see exactly how I've applied this mixing and mastering technique. So what I'm going to do here is play the lead and the bass together, so you can see where it sits level-wise. You see, this is right at 0, and this mastering's a bit different. I have Soothe on it and an ozone, like I was talking about. But if we listen to the bass separate, see, I also tried to apply that around, like, -6 technique. I usually just find that's about where things like to sit, especially if you've got the sub going properly. And then we have the lead. And if we put in all of the musical elements, and just not the drums, for example, so like, I believe they're all actually in this mid stem. see, that's being limited super hard, but I don't think it sounds bad, especially if we open this up. What I actually did, and you're probably wondering, why is this being limited so much? Because if you're doing this the way that I've mentioned, you'll actually just leave your threshold at 0. That's because I did actually turn the stems down a bit. You notice they're not normalized, but you don't even have to do that. That was just me being a little safe and making sure nothing was clipping going into my mastering project. But you could just ignore that, even if you have it normalized, just keep it at 0, and you'll notice this is actually a bit different in that it's being hit pretty hard. But I kind of lucked out, it sounded fine. And then if we go over to my drum stem, again, this doesn't look like it's hitting 0 here because I've literally turned it down before I exported. But I have everything boosted in this project, you'll notice, right at 0. Right where it wants to be, kind of for a finished master project. And then if you put it together, and exactly the same situation. If I take off my sidechain, like I said, with this method, you really need an aggressive sidechain or else it's not going to sound great. You see, there's no ducking happening. I take it off. It kind of just sounds like my kick, especially, is just getting lost in the mix because there's no space being carved out for it. But if you sidechain properly, you could use this method and get a super punchy mixdown. I really just wanted to make this video quickly, try to explain how I go about this, because this helped me out more than I could ever put into words, honestly. It's a really effective technique, and I hope you let me know in the comments below what you think of it if you start applying this to your tracks, and as well if you have any other completely different mixdown techniques that you have, because like I said, there's no real right way to do this. It's all about what you find gives you the most success. This is mine. If there's anything you're wondering about that maybe I didn't explain too well in this video, because that could happen, I'm still kind of new at this, let me know in the comments below and I'll do my best to get back to you and answer any questions you may have. But drop a like, subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.